regarding flight operations in Class Alpha airspace. You must conduct operations under instrument flight rules. Everyone knows that. In Class Alpha, the aircraft must be equipped with a transponder and altitude reporting equipment. When weather information indicates that abnormally high barometric pressure exists or will be above 31.00 inches of mercury, flight operations will not be authorized, contrary to the requirements published in the NOTAMs. So, temporary restriction on flight operations during abnormally high barometric pressure conditions. Special flight restrictions when any information indicates that barometric pressure on the route of flight exceeds or will exceed 31 inches of mercury. No person may operate an aircraft or initiate a flight contrary to the requirements established by the administrator and published with a notice to airmen issued under this section. There is a waiver, however. The administrator is authorized to waive any restriction issued under paragraph A of this section to permit emergency supply, transport, or medical services to be delivered to isolated communities where the operation can be conducted with an acceptable level of safety. So the answer is if it's over 31.0 inches of mercury, you cannot fly. How can you determine if another aircraft is on a collision course with your aircraft? There will be no apparent relative motion between your aircraft and the other aircraft. The answer is there will be no apparent relative motion between your aircraft and the other aircraft. Which is true regarding the blue and magenta colors used to depict airports on sectional aeronautical charts. Airports with control towers within Bravo, Charlie, and Delta and Echo are shown in blue. So if the airport is shown in blue in a Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo airspace, it has a tower. Refer to figure 52.1. So let's open it up. The floor of the Class Echo airspace above Georgetown Airport is at, let's look it up, 0.1. So Georgetown Airport is not surrounded by a soft magenta boundary like some other ones are, like 0.8. Hard to see that. The Georgetown Airport is not surrounded by a soft magenta boundary. Therefore, the floor of Class Echo airspace and the top of Class Golf airspace is 1,200 feet AGL. Inside an area bounded by a soft magenta line like 0.8 in the figure, the floor of Class Echo airspace is 700 AGL. Since 1,200 AGL, we have to do math. So the elevation of Georgetown Airport is 2623. You can see that right here. So you add 1,200 feet. So 1,200 is 3,823 feet MSL. So if the airport is within a magenta, soft magenta boundary, then the floor of Class Echo airspace is actually all the way down to 700 feet above ground level. If the airport is outside of the magenta, that means a floor of Class Echo goes to 1,200 feet above ground level. So that's this one. Refer to 52.7. Let me zoom out. (52.7). So Woodland. The floor of Class Echo over the town of Woodland is both 700 feet and 1,200 feet AGL. So the question is tricky because it asks you about the airspace over the town of Woodland, which is right here, and not over the airport of Woodland, which is here. So the town of Woodland is the big yellow blotch near point 7, which is this. Half of the town is inside the soft magenta line, and the other half is not. Therefore, class echo over the part of the town inside the magenta line has a floor of 700 AGL, and the class echo airspace over the part of the town outside the magenta line, which is over here, has a floor of 1,200 feet AGL. So the answer to the question is both 700 and 1,200 feet AGL. See the sectional aeronautical chart legend or the aeronautical chart usage guide for the definitions of the colored lines. Okay, so if something is within the magenta line, the floor of class echo goes to 700 feet. Outside of that, the floor of echo is at 1,200 feet AGL. 700 feet AGL, that is. So refer to figure 4, 52.8. 52.8. Auburn. The floor of class echo airspace over the Auburn airport is going to be 1539 plus 700 because it's within the magenta shading here, soft magenta. So you add 700 to 2239, or sorry, 700 to 1539, and that brings you to 2239. So you always got to look for echo, look at the soft magenta, and that will tell you whether you need to add 1,200 or 700. Okay, close that. The thin black line, let me pull up the figure again, 0.1. This thin black shaded line is most likely, which is right here, a military training route. The question is asking about the very light gray line here over the Millerton Lake Dam. Yeah, right here. And proceeds northwest. But basically, if you look at the chart legend, a military training route is like this, but they usually have something where they write what it is, like VR1164. But here they don't. It's just a soft gray line, so that's all that is. Soft gray line is a military training route. So we'll go back to this one, zoom out. What minimum altitude is required to avoid the Livermore Airport in Class D airspace? So you can see that the box is a dash blue circle identifying as Class Delta. The top of the Class Delta is 2,900 feet MSL, indicated by number 29 in this box. Since the Class Delta airspace goes up to and includes 2,900 feet, to be clear of the airspace, you would have to be at a minimum of 2,901 feet MSL. So the answer is 2,901 feet MSL. Okay. Back to the figure. Go to point 9. The alert area depicted within the magenta lines is an area in which, that means it's a military training area. There is a high volume of pilot training activities or an unusual type of aerial activity, either of which is hazardous to aircraft. So that's here. Okay, look at point 4. Point number 4, where is it? Here it is. The thinner outer magenta line depicted around SFO is an area in which an appropriate transponder must be used from outside of Class Bravo airspace from the surface to 10,000 feet. So that's the mode C veil, which is 30 nautical miles. When a dashed blue circle surrounds an airport on a sectional aeronautical chart, it will be the boundary of a Class Delta airspace. We know that. Okay, back to a figure. Point 4. The highest obstruction within 10 nautical miles of the Lincoln Regional Airport is how high above the ground? So I guess we'd have to use some sort of chart here. But it looks like 296, 662 is this one, 339. Yeah, this one right here. So you just look at all these and find out. It's about 5 miles southwest, and it shows 662. That's a parentheses. That shows the above ground level. The 714 here is the MSL, so 662 feet. So you just look like that. All right, back to a figure. Figure 52.6. Van Vleck Airport. Van Vleck is a private airport, so it's a non-public use airport. Van Vleck, all right, because it says private next to it. Okay, so the terrain at the obstruction, 8 nautical miles east, southeast of the Lincoln Airport. So we look at point 4. So Lincoln Airport, 8 nautical miles east, southeast. So east, southeast. The terrain, the obstruction. So point 4, which is here, the Lincoln Airport is how much higher than the airport elevation? The terrain and obstructions. So 8 miles east, southeast. I think they might be referring to this one, the Razi. So let me see here. The MSL top of the tower is 1,245 feet. That's the one they're referring to. So where is that? Oh, here we go. This one. So we have to measure miles using our ruler. 1,245 MSL. The height of the tower above ground level is 297 feet. So the height of the terrain at the tower is 1,245 minus 297. That's 948 feet. The field elevation of the airport is 121 feet. So the difference between the field elevation and the height of the terrain where the tower is 948 feet minus 121 feet. So it's 827 feet is the answer. So the terrain is how much higher than the airport elevation. So you just do a little bit of math. You look at the airport elevation, you look at the obstruction MSL, then you figure out the MSL at the bottom of that obstruction. So that's 297 feet below that. So you know that the terrain is 948 feet. And then you subtract the airport elevation of 121, and you get the answer of 827. Okay, another figure here. The Class Charlie airspace at Oakland extends from the surface upward and has a ceiling of, so we look at Oakland Airport here, number 6. So extends from the surface, so up to 2,100 feet, which is right here on the class Bravo shelf. And the other shelf over here is, I think, 5,000, but I can't see. I'm looking for it. Oh, up to 3,000 there. So it goes, the Bravo goes from 10,000 to 3,000, and over here it goes from 10,000 to 2,100. So it goes from the surface up to 2,100 feet and 3,000 feet. All right, so go to point 3. Point number 3. You're on a day VFR flight approaching Madeira, which is here, from the northwest at 1,100 feet MSL. Okay. Flight visibility is only 1 mile. Before you reach the area of the magenta shading on the chart, you observe sufficient ground references to navigate to the airport safely. What must you do when approaching the airport? So the real problem in the information is that the flight visibility is only 1 mile. The only class of airspace that allows you to fly VFR within 1 statute mile visibility is class Golf. So as you approach the land, you have to stay in the class Golf airspace. Since the airport is surrounded by a soft magenta line, this top of class Golf is inside that line is 700 feet. So you have to stay below 700 feet above ground level to stay in the class Golf airspace and land. So when you're approaching this, you have to stay outside of the class Echo and stay within the Golf airspace. So the answer is you must descend below 700 feet AGL. So you really need to know the visibility requirements of each airspace. When taxiing during strong quartering tailwinds, which aileron positions should be used? So you have to angle your aileron away from the wind. So when taxiing during strong quartering tailwinds, which aileron position should be used? The aileron down on the side from which the wind is blowing. So you want the wind to push the wing down. So that's correct. When taxiing a light, high wing airplane during strong quartering tailwinds, the aileron should be positioned opposite the direction from which the wind is blowing. So you basically put your yoke away from the wind, the opposite direction from which the wind is blowing. Refer to figure 51. When exiting a runway, you are clear of the active runway when the aircraft is past the solid line on the side of figure G. That is correct. Once you pass this part, you're on this side of the solid line and you're off the runway. The red sign D, would most likely be found, this one, at an intersection where a roadway may be mistaken as a taxiway. This means do not enter. Back to 51. When clearing an active runway, you are most likely clear of the ILS critical area when you pass which sign? And that's going to be this one. It looks like a railroad track. Go to the next. When taxiing up to an active runway, which position marking indicates you're approaching the ILS critical area? So let's go back and look at H. And yes, this is the ILS critical area. It looks like a yellow with the railroad tracks. Which symbol does not directly address runway incursion with other aircraft? Yeah, so this symbol, it's just like, it just says don't go there. It just means stop, no entry. It doesn't talk about their aircraft. With regard to the technique required for a crosswind correction for on takeoff, a pilot should use rudder as required to maintain directional control, aileron pressure into the wind, and higher than normal lift-off airspeed in both conventional and nose-wheel type airplanes. So with regard to the technique required for a crosswind correction on takeoff, you put the ailerons into the wind, use a rudder for directional control, and then use a higher than normal lift-off airspeed in both conventional and nose-wheel type airplanes. So you just take off at a higher airspeed. When turbulence is encountered during the approach and landing, what action is recommended and for what primary reason? Increase the airspeed slightly above normal approach speed to attain more positive control. I agree with that. A pilot's most immediate vital concern in the event of complete engine failure after becoming airborne on takeoff is maintaining a safe airspeed. The pilot's most immediate and vital concern in the event of complete engine failure after becoming airborne is maintaining a safe airspeed. So you need to nose down and get the right airspeed so you can glide somewhere. You don't want to stall. Which type of approach and landing is recommended during gusty wind conditions? Power on approach and power on landing. It provides more positive control of the airplane when there's strong horizontal wind gusts or up and down drafts are experienced. A proper crosswind landing on a runway requires that at the moment of touchdown, the direction of motion of the airplane and its longitudinal axis be parallel to the runway. So when you're on a crosswind landing, at the moment of touchdown, the direction of motion of the airplane and its longitudinal axis be parallel to the runway. So yeah, you need to straighten out that airplane so it lands straight. What is the general direction of movement of the other aircraft if during a night flight you observe a steady white light and a rotating red light ahead and at your altitude? So you see a steady white light, that's the tail, and a rotating red light and at your altitude. It's basically an aircraft heading away from you. But if it's at a slower airspeed, you could be approaching it, so be careful. All right, get some water. Regarding wake turbulence, the primary hazard is loss of control because of induced roll. So induced roll is, in rare instances, a wake encounter could cause catastrophic in-flight structural damage to an aircraft. However, the usual hazard is associated with induced rolling moments that can exceed the roll control authority of the encountering aircraft. During in-flight testing, aircraft intentionally flew directly up trailing vortex cores of larger aircraft. These tests demonstrated that the ability of aircraft to counteract the roll imposed by wake vortex depends primarily on the wingspan and counter control responsiveness. So just be careful. You will be departing behind a large aircraft. At what point on the runway should you plan to rotate? You got to rotate prior to the large aircraft rotation point to stay above that wake turbulence. Which procedure should you follow to avoid wake turbulence if a large jet crosses your course from left to right approximately 1 mile ahead and at your altitude? Make sure you are slightly above the path of the jet. To avoid possible wake turbulence from large jet aircraft that has just landed prior to your takeoff, at which point on the runway should you plan to become airborne? Past the point where the jet touched down. So to avoid wake turbulence from a jet that just landed before you took off, at which point on the runway should you plan to become airborne? and you should plan to take off past the point where the jet touched down because there's no more wake turbulence in that area. When landing behind a large aircraft, which procedure should be followed for vortex avoidance? When landing behind large aircraft, which procedure should be followed for vortex avoidance? So you should stay above its final approach flight path all the way to touchdown. With respect to vortex circulation, which is true? Vortex circulation generated by helicopters in forward flight trail. Let me restart. Vortex circulation generated by helicopters in forward flight trail behind in a manner similar to wingtip vortices generated by airplanes. In respect to vortex circulation, the vortex strength is greatest when the generating aircraft is heavy, clean, and slow. Heavy, clean, and slow is when vortex circulation is at its strongest. As hyperventilation progresses, a pilot can experience symptoms of suffocation and drowsiness. So to explain, hyperventilation is an abnormal increase in the volume of air breathed in and out of the lungs, and it can occur subconsciously when a stressful situation is encountered. Hyperventilation blows off excessive carbon dioxide from the body, and a pilot can experience symptoms of lightheadedness, suffocation, drowsiness, tingling in the extremities, and coolness, and react to them with even greater hyperventilation. Incapacitation can eventually result from incoordination, disorientation, painful muscle spasms. Finally, unconsciousness can occur. So, once again, as hyperventilation progresses, a pilot can experience symptoms of suffocation and drowsiness. To scan properly for traffic, a pilot should use a series of short, regularly spaced eye movements that bring successive areas of the sky into the central visual field. Which is a common symptom of hyperventilation? Drowsiness. Rapid breathing associated with hyperventilation would most likely result in carbon dioxide leaving the body. That's right. Hypoxia is the result of which of these conditions? Insufficient oxygen reaching the brain is the same as hypoxia. Hypoxia is when you have insufficient oxygen reaching the brain. To overcome the symptoms of hyperventilation, a pilot should slow his breathing rate. So slow down your breathing rate. Which is true regarding the presence of alcohol within the human body? Judgment and decision-making abilities can be adversely affected even by small amounts of alcohol. So small amounts of alcohol can affect your judgment and decision-making abilities. Hypoxia susceptibility due to inhalation of carbon monoxide increases as altitude increases. So once again, hypoxia susceptibility due to inhalation of carbon monoxide increases as altitude increases. So if you're breathing in carbon monoxide and there's less oxygen available, it's going to get even worse. To best overcome the effects of spatial disorientation, a pilot should rely on aircraft instrument indications. To best overcome the effects of spatial disorientation, a pilot should rely on aircraft instrument indications. So when you're disoriented, focus on the instruments, which is true regarding the preheating of the aircraft during cold weather conditions. The cabin area as well as the engine should be preheated. When departing from a runway that is covered with snow or slush, what should a pilot do to prevent damage to the landing gear due to the conditions? Do not retract the landing gear immediately to allow the landing gear to air dry. That makes sense. Risk management, as part of the aeronautical decision-making process, relies on which features to reduce the risks associated with each flight. Risk management, as part of the aeronautical decision-making process, relies on which features to reduce the risks associated with each flight. Situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment. So risk management relies on which features to reduce the risks associated with each flight. Situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment. Aeronautical decision-making is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action for a given set of circumstances. So aeronautical decision-making is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action for a given set of circumstances. The aeronautical decision-making process identifies steps involving good decision-making. One of the steps includes a pilot identifying personal attitudes hazardous to safe flight. Examples of classic behavioral traps that experienced by pilot. Examples of classic behavioral traps that experienced pilots may fall into are trying to complete a flight as planned, please passengers, meet schedules, and demonstrate the right stuff. The basic drive for a pilot to demonstrate the right stuff can have an adverse effect on safety by generating tendencies that lead to practices that are dangerous, often illegal, and may lead to a mishap. Most pilots have fallen prey to dangerous tendencies or behavior problems at some time. Some of these dangerous tendencies or behavior patterns must be identified and eliminated, and they include peer pressure, get-there-itis, loss of positional or situational awareness, and operating without adequate fuel reserves. An early part of the aeronautical decision-making process involves taking a self-assessment hazardous attitude inventory test. Hazardous attitudes which contribute to poor pilot judgment can be effectively counteracted by redirecting that hazardous attitude so that appropriate action can be taken. What are some of the hazardous attitudes dealt with in aeronautical decision-making? Anti-authority, which is don't tell me. Impulsivity, do something quickly without thinking. And macho, I can do it. When a pilot recognizes a hazardous thought, he or she then should correct it by stating the corresponding antidote. Which of the following is the antidote for macho? Taking chances is foolish. What is the first step in neutralizing a hazardous attitude in the ADM process? The recognition of hazardous thoughts. The recognition of hazardous thoughts is the first step in neutralizing a hazardous attitude. What should a pilot do when recognizing a thought as hazardous? He should label that thought as hazardous, then correct that thought by stating the corresponding learned antidote. To help manage cockpit stress, pilots must condition themselves to relax and think rationally when stress appears. To help manage cockpit stress, pilots must condition themselves to relax and think rationally when stress appears. What does good cockpit stress management begin with? Good life stress management. The passengers for a charter flight have arrived almost an hour late for a flight that requires a reservation. Which of the following alternatives best illustrates the anti-authority reaction. Those reservation rules do not apply to this flight. Which of the following alternatives best illustrates the anti-authority reaction? When you say those reservation rules do not apply to this flight. While conducting an operational check of the cabin pressurization system, the pilot discovers that the rate control feature is inoperative. He knows that he can manually control the cabin pressure, so he elects to disregard the discrepancy and departs on the trip. He will just handle the system himself. Which of the following alternative best describes the invulnerability reaction? The answer is that, quote, what is the worst that could happen? So yeah, he thinks that is not that bad because he's thinking, what is the worst that can happen? Many people feel that accidents happen to others, but never to them. They know accidents can happen and they know that anyone can be affected, but they never really feel or believe that they will be personally involved. Pilots who think this are more likely to take chances and increase risk. So you don't think you're going to be vulnerable. So the pilot thinks that what is the worst that could happen? That's not good. The pilot and passengers, anxious to get their destination for a business presentation, level 4 thunderstorms are reported to be in a line across their intended route of flight. Which of the following alternatives best illustrates the impulsivity reaction? They want to hurry and get going before things get worse. They're being impulsive. By doing something quickly, they want to get going quickly. This is the attitude of people who frequently feel the need to do something immediately. They do not stop to think about what they are about to do. They do not select the best alternative, they just do the first thing that comes to mind. While on an IFR flight, a pilot emerges from a cloud to find himself within 300 feet of a helicopter. Which of the following alternatives best illustrate the macho reaction? He flies a little closer just to show him. That's really stupid that he would do that. Pilots who are always trying to prove that they are better than anyone else are thinking, I can do it. I'll show them. Pilots with this type of attitude will try to prove themselves by taking risks in order to impress others. While this pattern is thought to be a male characteristic, women are equally susceptible. When a pilot recognizes a hazardous thought, he or she should then correct that by applying the corresponding antidote. Which of the following is the antidote for anti-authority, don't tell me, hazardous attitude? The antidote is follow the rules, they are usually right. A pilot and friends are going to fly to an out-of-town football game. When the passengers arrive, the pilot determines that they will be over the maximum gross weight for takeoff with the existing fuel load. Which of the following alternatives best illustrate the resignation reaction? Well, no one told them about the extra weight. So this is more like a what's the use? Pilots think, what's the use? They do not see themselves as being able to make a great deal of difference in what happens to them. When things go well, the pilot is apt to think that that's good luck. When things go badly, the pilot may feel that someone is out to get me or attribute it to some bad luck. The pilot will leave the action to others, for better or for worse. Sometimes such pilots will even go along with unreasonable requests just to be a nice guy. So they're going to be over the weight, and his reaction to that is a resignation reaction, which is, quote, well, no one told him about the extra weight, which is resignation. Which of the following is the final step of the DECIDE model for effective risk management and aeronautical decision making? Evaluate. That just makes sense because it's like a final step. You evaluate everything. So the first, I guess I'll just go through the six. The six the 6 steps of the DECIDE model are detect, estimate, choose, identify, do, and evaluate. So the answer to this question is evaluate. That's the final step. Which of the following is the first step to the DECIDE model for effective risk management? Detect. That's the first step. Detect. The DECIDE model is comprised of a 6-step process to provide a pilot the logical way of approaching decision making. These steps are detect, estimate, choose, identify, do, and evaluate. So the DECIDE model is 6 steps: detect, estimate, choose, identify, do, and evaluate. Okay, next question. The taxiway ending marker indicates the taxiway does not continue. When exiting the runway exit sign indicates the direction to turn to exit the runway onto the named taxiway. The ILS critical area boundary sign identifies the edge of the ILS critical area. Next question. When turning onto a taxiway from another taxiway, the taxiway directional sign indicates the designation and direction of the taxiways leading out of an intersection. Once again, when turning onto a taxiway from another taxiway, the taxiway directional sign indicates the designation and direction of the taxiways leading out of an intersection. Kind of a mouthful. Refer to figure 60. You are taxiing and see sign 2 on the left side of the intersection you are approaching. You see sign 1 in front of you across the intersection. Does taxiway A continue through the intersection? No. That's a crosshatch yellow and black lines. And that shows the taxiway ending marker. When a taxiway ending marker on the other side of the intersection pictured exists, it means that the taxiway does not continue. Coded transponder equipped with altitude reporting equipment is required for Class A, Class B, and Class C airspace areas. A coded transponder equipped with altitude reporting equipment is required for A, Bravo, and Charlie. A taxiway location sign serves to identify taxiway on which the aircraft is located. Refer to 64. You see the sign when holding short of the runway. You receive clearance to back taxi on the runway for a full-length runway 8 departure. Which way should you turn when first taxiing for the runway for takeoff? So you're going to turn to the right. It's 26-8. You have clearance to back taxi for a full runway length departure on runway 8. So right now you're holding short at 26. So you got to turn right to get to 8. Within aircraft movement areas, destination signs identify the direction to take off runways. Destination signs identify direction to take off runways. Light beacons producing red flashes indicate obstructions or areas considered hazardous to aerial navigation. When planning for an emergency landing at night, one of the primary considerations should include selecting a landing area close to public access if possible. When operating VFR at night, what is the first indication of flying into restricted visibility conditions? A gradual disappearance of lights on the ground is an indication of flying into restricted visibility conditions if you can't see lights on the ground anymore. For night flying operations, the best night vision is achieved when the rods in the eyes have become adjusted to the darkness in approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes to have your night eyes working right. Night vision. An idea of the magnitude of the load factor obtained while maneuvering an airplane can be determined by considering the degree to which one is pressed down in the seat. So you can just feel the load factor, feel the G's. After experiencing a power plant failure at night, what action is a first priority? Maintain control, maintain positive control. And that's a solid 100 questions. We'll stop there.